Where am I? The regular meeting of the Aurora City Council for Monday, April 24, 2023 is called to order. Will the clerk please read the roll?
Mayor Kaufman.
Here.
Councilmember Bergen.
Here.
Councilmember Coombs.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Drinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Marcano.
Present.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo.
Present.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Here.
And Councilmember Zvonek.
Here.
There's a quorum.
Announcement for the call-in line.
City Council welcomes feedback from the public on both matters appearing on the agenda and during public invited to be heard. If you would like to speak and have not already spoken to an operator, please press *3. For those watching on Channel 8, call 855-695-3475 and press *3 when connected. You will hear a prompt confirming you are in line to speak to an operator and then be able to continue listening to the meeting. When the operator comes on the line, please be ready to give them your name and agenda item you wish to speak on. Keep in mind you must press *3 before the city clerk reads the title of the item you wish to speak on. Finally, as a reminder, council does not allow comments about any items on the agenda during public invited to be heard. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes, and public invited to be heard is limited to 1 hour in total.
El Consejo Municipal de la Ciudad de Aurora da la bienvenida a la opinión de sus habitantes y otros vecinos en asuntos comparecientes en la agenda y durante la invitación a la audiencia pública. Tenemos servicios de interpretación al español para las personas que hayan venido a hablar presencialmente. Finalmente, recuerda que el Consejo no permite comentarios en ninguno de los asuntos en la agenda durante la invitación para escuchar al público. Gracias.
Please join me in an invocation. Dear God, please protect our first responders, police, fire, detention, and marshals, and keep them safe. And God bless those who help keep them safe, our emergency dispatchers. And with that, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of the minutes for April 10, 2023. A motion is in order.
Mayor, move to approve minutes from April 10th.
It's been moved by Councilmember Murillo, seconded by
Zvonek.
Second by Councilmember Bergen to approve the minutes for April 10th, 2023. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, call for the question on item number 5A.
Mayor Kaufman.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. The motion passes to adopt the April 10th council meeting minutes.
Firefighter Warner Kern in the audience, if he could step forward. And I believe that there is a pin as well. Let's see. Is it 42 years of service? 45. Now, and I understand you want to do how many more? Okay, good, good. Well, this is one of our extraordinary firefighters who has been with our department for an extraordinary 45 years, serving to keep our residents safe. And so we're here tonight to honor his service. And if you could mention the significance of this pin.
Well, the significance of the pin is 45 years. The other thing, too, is Fire Medic Kern has worked at the busiest stations in the city. So he's done at Station 4, at Station 7, Station 1. He was also a member of the hazmat team. And then what he really did was he stepped up and became a mentor to our new paramedics. So he was what we call a field instructor. And that's a big thing with us. So he was able to mentor all of those people. So he mentored new firefighters. He mentored firefighters that had been on 5 or more years to become a paramedic. So he didn't just sit and be idle. He's been busy. He's been running a lot of calls. He's done a great job for the department, and he will be greatly missed. He's a great friend, a great firefighter, and a great brother. So let's give him a round of applause.
Do you have any words of wisdom for us?
My brother served with the city of Aurora, too. He started in 1970. He was a lieutenant on the fire department. So we've gotten 53 years of serving Aurora. Love every minute of it. I think it's a great city, great department. And I think the people we have in place now are just as wonderful as I started. They do extraordinary things that nobody ever sees. And like to give them a hand to fire and police.
It is Municipal Clerk Week. Fancy that. Guess who prepared this? When do we have a Municipal Mayor's Week? Okay. Whereas in the office of the municipal clerk, a time-honored and vital part of local government exists throughout the world and is the oldest among public services. And whereas the office of the municipal clerk provides the professional link between local government bodies and agencies of government at other levels, and whereas the municipal clerk serves as the information center on functions of local government and community, and whereas municipal clerks have pledged to be ever mindful of their neutrality and impartiality, rendering equal service to all, and whereas municipal clerks continually strive to improve their administration's dealings through participation in education programs, seminars, workshops, and the annual meetings of their state, provincial, county, and international professional organizations. And whereas this week is to recognize the accomplishments of the office of the municipal clerk, now therefore I, Mike Hoffman, Mayor of the City of Aurora, Colorado, do hereby proclaim April 30th to May 6th, 2023 as Municipal Clerks Week, in witness whereof I have herein set my hand and cause the seal of the City of Aurora, Colorado to be affixed this 24th day of April 2023. And we do have an extraordinary clerk, and I wonder if you could come up here and receive this proclamation, and if you have some words of wisdom, and you always do when you lecture the members of myself and the council, but
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to thank City Council and the Mayor and City Management and everybody in the public for really helping the City Clerk's office thrive. We have a great team, and I'm really proud of all the work that they've done. So, and thank you for your support.
Clerk Katie Rodriguez, thank you so much for all you do. Appreciate it. National Youth Violence Prevention Week. Councilmember Lawson, who's taken a leadership position on this critical issue, will read the proclamation.
Have everybody here? Okay, I will read the proclamation. Whereas National Youth Violence Prevention Week was created in 2001 by the Students Against Violence Everywhere, an initiative of Sandy Hook Promise to raise awareness and educate the public on effective ways to reduce and prevent youth violence. And whereas Aurora is committed to reducing youth violence by merging citywide efforts and resources to strategically tackle this issue as a public health crisis. And whereas through Aurora, violence among our youth continues to affect our communities, in 2022, 14 of the 52 homicides in Aurora were victims under the age of 25. And whereas Aurora has convened a group of stakeholders to form the Youth Violence Prevention Network, a conglomerate of youth, community, government agencies, and city leaders to develop strategies around youth violence prevention and intervention efforts that serve at and high-risk youth. And whereas for referred youth and their families, Aurora's Youth Violence Prevention Programs provides individualized wraparound service and implements critical incident responses to address the impacts of current delinquent and violent incidents. Now, therefore, I, Mike Kaufman, Mayor of the City of Aurora, Colorado, do hereby proclaim April 24th through the 28th, 2023 as National Youth Violence Prevention Week, and encourage all residents to support Aurora youth by finding ways to be trusted adult in and intentionally contribute positively to the life of at least one person under the age of 25. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Aurora, Colorado to be affixed this 24th day of April 2023. And I would just like to say something. Mayor Kaufman, I want to thank you so much for your partnership in 2019 when I brought this forth. You really were very helpful in getting the program initiated and also the funding and working with stakeholders. I also want to thank the nonprofit organizations and residents who continue to come to us and say, hey, we need to do something, and provide actual ways that we can come together and work on this very important issue that is impacting our community. And to APD as well, Mike Hanavan, all of Aurora Police Department, Mike Hanavan, Commander Hildebrand, and all of the YVP program. I really appreciate all of your efforts and support on this program. So I'll let you have some words.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for your support. Thank you to the community for your support. Our partnership with the police department, with the community, with the public really has been instrumental in the success of our program, and I think we're really just beginning, and we've got a lot of good things happening down the road.
The Mayor Pro Tem will be reading a proclamation for Second Chance Month and for Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Good evening. This first proclamation is for Second Chance Month. 2 years ago, City Council followed a national trend and declared April Second Chance Month in Aurora, recognizing that after offenders have paid their debt to society, that we need to do what we can to help them re-enter the workforce. Whereas every person is endowed with human dignity and value, and American values include redemption and second chances, and whereas individuals released from prison and those who have paid their debt after committing a crime face significant barriers known as collateral consequences, these barriers can contribute to recidivism, which increases victimization and decreases public safety. And whereas individuals with a criminal history often struggle to find housing, employment, or education, regain voting rights, volunteer in their community, and find opportunities to pay for significant debt that arises as a result of their conviction and incarceration. And whereas the Council of State Governments reports that the number of legal collateral consequences of a criminal conviction exceeds 44,000, and youth face more than 1,000 collateral consequences, which affects their high school and higher education. And whereas the stigma and legal barriers associated with a criminal record result in lost human capital and lost economic output for the United States. And whereas dignified work and community support are keys to flourishing after incarceration, but the COVID-19 pandemic has caused 1 in 3 individuals in community corrections to lose their jobs and many in reentry providers to close their operations. And whereas the designation of April as Second Chance Month will increase public awareness about the needs of those who have paid their debt and encourage individuals, employers, congregations, and communities to offer second chances. Now, therefore, I, Mike Kaufman, Mayor of the City of Aurora, do proclaim the month of April 2023 as Second Chance Month. And next up, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Is Sergeant Ronald Taguma here? Come on down. Great. I'll go ahead and read this and then give you guys the mic. Whereas sexual assault is a public health crisis, and whereas, according to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, over half of women and nearly 1/3 of men have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, and survivors often experience lifelong effects on their physical, emotional, and mental health. And whereas sexual assault affects all facets of society and disregards age, ability, race, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, socioeconomic background, religion, veteran status, among others, that it can occur anytime, anywhere. Whereas there is compelling evidence that we can be successful in reducing sexual violence through prevention education, increased awareness, and holding perpetrators who commit acts of violence responsible for their actions. And whereas Sexual Assault Awareness Month draws attention to the fact that sexual violence is widespread and that survivors of this crime need our attention and support. Now, therefore, I, Mike Kaufman, Mayor of the City of Aurora, Colorado, do hereby proclaim April 2023 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
I'm not much for speaking, but I absolutely do want to recognize the work that these detectives put in. These crimes are very personal to the victims, and it's very difficult for them. And our detectives do a fantastic job of showing compassion, and they work diligently to try to get to the truth of the matter, and they work for justice. They do a fantastic job. And I also want to thank our partners, the victim advocates that we work closely with, the hospital personnel that come into play. It really takes a team effort, and thank you for the recognition.
Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Bergen has requested to read National Crime Victims' Rights Week proclamation.
On. Whereas the term victim is more than just a label, it has legal standing and protections that go along with it. And whereas crime victim rights acts passed in Colorado and at the federal level guarantee victims the right to meaningfully participate and use their voice in the criminal legal process. And whereas including and elevating the voices of survivors ensures that they are heard and seen and creates a path to forging and sustaining community trust. And whereas survivors' lived experience can serve as a catalyst for implementing innovative programs, shifting existing programs in new directions, and changing policies or practices that prevent victims from accessing services or pursuing justice. And whereas National Crime Victims' Rights Week reminds us to ensure that crime victims are heard in every space where decisions impacting them are made. And whereas the City of Aurora is dedicated to ensuring that crime victims are heard, believed, and supported, and is committed to services that assist victims this week and throughout the year. Now, therefore, I, Mike Kaufman, Mayor of the City of Aurora, Colorado, do hereby proclaim April 23rd through the 29th, 2023 as National Crime Victims' Rights Week, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Aurora, Colorado, to be affixed this 21st day of April 2023. And I'm going to pass the microphone over. I do want to say that I appreciate all of your work. It is so important that we do not forget our victims, and they have been hurt in such a deep, deep way, and anything that we can do to help them is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you to all of Council for your ongoing support. We served over 14,000 victims last year, and it's such a horrible privilege for us to do that, to walk with folks as they often experience the worst days of their lives. It's an honor to do so, and we just really appreciate all of Council's support. Thank you, and I think maybe the chief wants to say something too. Is that why you came in?
Hi. You have an hour? Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry to come up earlier, but seriously, a lot of folks don't realize just the phenomenal work our victim services counselors do in the field. We don't have enough of them. We need more of them, but I just hope that the community understands that not only do they help the victims and their families, they help us secure justice, they help us create a safer community, and most importantly, they help victims transition to be survivors and to come out better than me. So thank you for taking the time to recognize my personal heroes, and that's our Victim Services Unit. Thank you, Mayor.
Public invited to be heard.
Yes, Mayor, we have a few individuals. Robbie DeYoung, followed by Charles Richardson.
Council, Mayor, members of the audience. My name is Robbie DeYoung, and I'm with the Next Door Group, Stolen and Vandalized Vehicles in Colorado. I am here today to ask a couple of questions. The first one is, we had a really good ordinance passed that allowed victims 3 days to retrieve their vehicle once it ends up in impound. I have said this before, I will say it again. 3 days is an insult. We need at least 10 business days, because it takes 3 days just for the mail to get from impound to the victim. And they need more time to pick up their vehicles, because they've got to make arrangements for a tow truck. They've got to make arrangements for someone to fix their vehicle. They need time just on their own to take off work to go and pick up their vehicle. 3 days is not enough. I listened to the wonderful presentation and awards that were given to our victims. A week? They only get a week? National Victim Awareness? That needs to be a month. That doesn't need to be just a week. And it's something you should probably think about in the future. Because I bet you there are people in this audience that have been a victim of either motor vehicle, or they know somebody that has been a victim of motor vehicle theft. My friend, Paige, and her daughter, Taylor, were involved, and I've brought this up before, were involved in a carjacking. Taylor was murdered, all for a criminal wanting to get their vehicle so that they could continue running from the police because their vehicle broke down. I don't have a lot of compassion for the criminal. I have all compassion for the victims. And I would like to see this council have more. For Taylor, please consider more. Thank you.
Charles Richardson, followed by Aaron Futrell.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, especially city staff. Thanks for your service to the public. Everybody turn down their hearing aids, and if you have any crystal here, protect it. We want to know, Local 1290 wants to know why Mr. Krob, the commission's attorney, was fired. You did it. And the reason I say you did it, there is absolutely no way the city manager or the city attorney would have freelanced this. It is a colossal, stupid error. And let me tell you why. Mr. Krob has been the commission's attorney since the 1990s, and he has acted faithfully. And he acts as the judge and the commissioners of the jury in all the disciplinary hearings. You know, in my 28 years in that office, I appointed the prosecutor. If I could have appointed the judge, I would have never lost a case. Think about it. Now, you're going to hear some malarkey from someone up there. Oh, this attorney that basically I'm going to appoint will still be free and independent in their judgment. Find that very hard to believe. You have a bigger problem. PORAC is the organization that defends police and firefighters at Civil Service Commission hearings. And do you think they are going to accept the city attorney firing the independent counsel and shoehorning some city stooge into that position? Absolutely not. You have a tremendous built-in appeal from the get-go on every disciplinary hearing going forward. So I want someone on this council to ask Mr. Batchelor or Mr. Brotzman, did you fire Mr. Krob? And if so, why? Now, I think I know why. Because Mr. Krob had the temerity to suggest that there was tension between what the council and the city were trying to do to the commission and the city charter. Well, that must have really offended someone. And so they said, you're fired. And, you know, in the 1970s, again in 1987, again in 2006, the voters didn't approve a charter amendment that read, do you approve of a weak, subjugated civil service commission where the city and not you do all the hiring decisions, where the city decides who the commission independent counsel is going to be? And I know what's coming next, where the chief makes the ultimate decision on promotions. I don't think so.
Mayor, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Please proceed.
And I don't know if this is for the city attorney or the interim city manager. So the speaker said something, alluded to something about the appointment of a new attorney for the Civil Service Commission. My understanding is that attorney is supposed to be independent, but it sounds like it was appointed from our existing city attorney staff, and that would be concerning. So can we get an explanation for what happened there?
So all outside counsel work for me.
Okay.
Under Mr. Richardson, under Mr. Hyman, under myself, there is an attorney for the Civil Service Commission from my office. Currently, that is Julie Heckman, my deputy.
Okay.
In the disciplinary council, also, again, is an outside attorney working for me. That is a separate position. So it is not a general counsel. It is a position, again, that I would hire to represent the Civil Service Commission.
Okay, very well, thank you.
So my hope is that we can have that.
This, we're not going to have a dialogue. This is not on the agenda. We can have a discussion offline about this.
If you would have let me finish, I was asking for it to be on the agenda.
Consent calendar, adoption of the consent calendar.
Mayor, we're not finished with public invited to be heard.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please proceed.
Aaron Futrell, followed by K. Dot.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. I'm up here regarding an issue that I recently noticed on the RTD light rail. At 9 Mile, the illegal use of drugs has gotten as bad as Union Station. I know Aurora doesn't want to be Denver, and so I reached out to the RTD board, a director, a former council person, and his response to me is what brought me up here. His response to me is, it's not our responsibility to basically monitor 9 Mile or provide security. It's to move people. That was offensive. That was wrong. So I reached out to one of your colleagues who has said they would support me and be an ally in this fight, because I'd rather have people be safe. We literally just talked about victims. We talked about the sexual assault victims as well. When you see the drug use, the criminal activity, and the criminal activity that it leads to, because this isn't marijuana. I could care less about the green solution right next to 9 Mile. It's legal in Colorado. I may not agree with it, but I don't have a problem with it. But we're talking about drug use like fentanyl. We're talking about heroin. I literally watched as a group of families got on the light rail to 9 Mile, where another group was on the light rail smoking meth, doing fentanyl, doing whatever. If I have to be a one-man band to basically raise awareness so we can stop this, I will be that one-man band. I know a majority of council is committed to safety, security, and protecting our citizens, so that's why I'm up here bringing awareness to this. I thank you for your time, and please save the Aurora Reservoir. Thank you.
K. Dot.
Good afternoon, Aurora. Wanted to make a couple of shout outs real quick. I've been doing my patrolling and making sure holding officers accountable. And I would like to shout out these officers for doing really, really good work. Officer C. Allen, who else? Officer B. Sperber, Officer L. Hughes Butler, and Officer K. or Kevin Manley. They do really, really great work, and I wanted to shout them out. So if you guys can put that on record. Now, to hold somebody accountable, Mr. Stephen Son Booger. Wondering when you're going to answer my my email, and wondering when did you ever apologize for the ethnic group that you offended a few months ago, you know, Hispanic people, Middle Eastern people, to promote your little funky ass restaurant. Just know I'm going to hold you accountable. That seat is going to be hot every fucking time. You understand? You do not deserve to be called councilman. I will make you resign. Do you understand? You racist piece of shit. Just because you got some black woman, you think you down with the people, huh? You think you one of us? You'll never be one of us. Never. And I'm gonna put that on record. You're a racist piece of shit, just like the shit on your chin. Either you can resign or I can make you quit, one or the other. Either way, accountability will be had, and I will expose your ass. Now, answer my fucking meeting.
That's not really necessary. Where are we at in time?
40 seconds. That was the last individual.
Approval of the consent calendar, item number 9A1.
We have to adopt the agenda.
What, I'm sorry?
Adoption of the agenda.
Adoption of the agenda.
Mayor.
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to allow two appellants to make a 15-minute presentation, as well as the applicant, on the Echelon Eagle Bend multifamily site plan appeal.
It does require, okay. The amendment's been moved by Councilmember Bergen, seconded by?
Second.
Second by Councilmember McConnell, to allow two appellant presentations of 15 minutes each. Discussion?
Mayor, I'd like to propose a substitute motion.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Approve the agenda, adding 11A for two 15-minute appellant presentations, but move 11A after item 12A.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by?
Mayor, I'll second that.
Discussion.
Okay. This requires that. Seconded by Councilmember Coombs. Discussion on the substitute motion.
Mayor.
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, if I might ask my colleague, Mayor Pro Tem Gardner, could you explain the reason, just for the audience, of why you would like to move up an item?
Yeah, I'm proposing to put item 11A after. Mayor, is it okay if I speak, or am I going to get gaveled down again? I'd like to move item 11A after item 12A. Item 12A is our spring supplemental, which requires most of our department heads to be here. That item more than likely will only take a couple of minutes, whereas, as you can see from the audience, item 11A is going to take a considerable amount of time. And so, in fairness to our staff, I'd like to switch those items in the agenda order. It will only delay the echelon item by a few minutes.
Further discussion on the substitute motion? Seeing none, the question before us is the substitute motion. Would the call for the question?
I know.
Mayor Kaufman?
Mayor votes no.
The motion passes with 10 yes votes, 1 no vote to adopt the agenda with appellant presentations, and item 11A moved after item 12A.
Very well, substitute motion then passes. The next item is the consent calendar.
Mayor.
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, I make a motion to approve 9A1 through 9A16.
It's been moved by Councilmember Bergen, seconded by?
Sundberg.
Seconded by Councilmember Sundberg.
Mayor, if I may, the whole consent calendar includes 9C1. Councilmember Bergen, do you want to include that in your motion?
Yes, sorry. I would like to include 9C1, Mayor.
Thank you.
Very well, the motion is the adoption of the consent calendar, item number 9A1 to 9C1. Discussion, who was the second on that?
Sundberg.
Councilmember Sundberg, seconded by Councilmember Sundberg. Discussion? Seeing none, question before us is the adoption of the consent calendar, item number 9A1 to 9C1. Call for the question.
Mayor Kaufman?
Mayor votes yes.
Councilmember Zvonek? Thank you. The motion passes to adopt the consent calendar for motions.
Okay. The next is the adoption of the consent calendar, resolutions and ordinances, item number 10A1 to item number 10A8. I'm sorry, 10B1.
Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Motion to approve 10A1 through 10B1.
Been moved by Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by
Coombs?
Second by Councilmember Coons to approve item number 10A1 to 10B1. Discussion. Seeing none, call for the question on the adoption of the consent calendar for resolutions and ordinances.
Councilmember Marcano and Savonic?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes to adopt the consent calendar for resolutions and ordinances.
Spring supplemental.
Item 12A is introduction of ordinance 2023-12, appropriating sums of money in addition to those appropriated in ordinance numbers 2021-56, 2022-24, and 2022-73 for the 2022 fiscal year, and ordinance number 2022-59 for the 2023 fiscal year.
Presentation by staff.
Sure. I'm Jackie from the Budget Office, and departments have a couple times a year where they're able to request changes to their budget, once in the fall and once in the spring. So today we have the spring supplemental packet with final adjustments for 2022 and initial adjustments for 2023. There have been no changes to this packet since the study session. For 2022, all items in the general fund were either projected and included in the 2023 budget plan, or were technical and had no impact to the fund balance. For all other funds, most items were projected or reviewed by council or at council committee or council meeting. There are also several technical items to appropriate grant funds and lapse capital budgets. For 2023, most items have been reviewed by council or are technical, such as budget transfers, operational realignments, appropriations of grant funding, and reappropriation of funds that were not able to be spent in 2022. In the general fund, there are ongoing requests to add 9.5 civilian FTE and 7 variable hour positions to support public safety. 6.5 of them are in the police department, and the rest are all in human resources for recruitment and background services. So that's the end of our short presentation on the supplemental.
Questions of staff? Seeing no question, is there anybody who wishes to be heard on this issue?
We do have one individual, Charles Richardson.
Mayor, good evening. Local 1290 objects to stripping out all the money for the background investigators. Now, we have learned that staff has been consistently telling you, and in case there are any Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts in the crowd, a shoddy job of background investigations. Council didn't stop for a second to do an independent analysis of those background studies and took staff's word 100%. And so that's disturbing. You know, the former interim Chief Oates makes a big public deal, which he's good at, of saying only 5 cadets graduated and we can't sustain our police department. He's right. 5 cadets were all we had. So who do you think he blamed? Let's play Family Feud for a second. What were the 3 top reasons for not having more than 5 cadets? Number 1, Civil Service Commission. Number 2, Civil Service Commission. Number 3, Civil Service Commission. Let's open all the boxes to our contestants. All 10 boxes are the Civil Service Commission. And let me say, the commission heard that. They changed their rules. God forbid, I should say, lowering standards. But let's be honest. They took away some of the prohibitive rules, and there was logic to that. The reason we had 5 cadets is not because the Civil Service Commission is doing a crappy job. You're getting subpar applicants. There, I said it. It's out in the open. The commission felt those were the only 5 candidates that they wanted to put a gun in their hands, and I applaud them for that. So you don't like what I'm hearing, you don't like what I'm saying, because you're being fed a torrent of city misinformation from staff. There's only been one council member who has taken the time to reach out to us and get our side of the story.
Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard?
No.
Very well. Motion is in order.
Mayor, motion to approve item 12A.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by
Zvonik.
Second by Councilmember Zvonik to approve item number 12A, spring supplemental. Further discussion? Seeing no discussion, question before us is the adoption of item number 12A, spring supplemental, 2023 spring supplemental. Call for the question.
The motion passes to adopt ordinance 2023-12.
Will the clerk now please read the title to item number 11A?
Item 11A is a public hearing without related ordinance to consider an appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the Echelon at Eagle Bend multifamily site plan with adjustments.
Public hearing is now open. Presentation by staff.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of Council. My name is Asia Tibbs. I'm the Senior Planner for the Planning and Development Services Department. I'm presenting to you the Echelon at Eagle Bend multifamily site plan with adjustments. This is the City Council appeal public hearing. Sorry about that. The subject site is located, is 14.73 acres, located on the southeast corner of Aurora Parkway and Quemoy Way. The property is surrounded by existing two-family duplex residences and open spaces for the Eagle Bend community, with the exception of the Aurora 14 fire station, which is located to the east of the site. The subject site and all surrounding property is zoned planned development. Planned Development Zone District allows for the adoption of unique site-specific land use regulations, and planned development for this area is known as the Eagle Bend General Development Plan, or GDP. Because the Eagle Bend GDP is considered a zoning document, building and development standards are established within that GDP, and they must be adhered to for the site development. The GDP standards must also be harmonized with the zoning standards, the definitions of the UDO, and the spirit and intent of the comprehensive plan. Where the GDP is silent, vague, or ambiguous, the UDO is to be followed to ensure adherence to the overall review criteria and consistency with the development review process. This is an image of the site plan proposed for the Echelon at Eagle Bend multifamily application. It includes 260 units, over 10 multifamily buildings, as well as a clubhouse, pool, and maintenance building. Parking requirements are met through a mixture of tuck-under parking, detached garages, and surface parking. The development has access from East Aurora Parkway and South Quemoy Way. A private street is also proposed through the site to connect both access points and provide street frontage for the internal buildings. Amenities proposed within the project include the clubhouse, a pool, a dog park, and walking path along the south side of the site, which circles the detention pond open space and connects to the dog park. Building elevations have provided four-sided architecture with a variety of massing, building materials, and multiple gable roof ridge lines. Half of the buildings are 2 to 3 stories, located along the back and interior of the site, and the remaining 5 buildings are 4-story buildings, which are located along Aurora Parkway and a portion of Quemoy. Staff and the Planning Commission did find the application in compliance with the approval criteria for site plans established within the UDO. Overall, the proposal complies with the Eagle Bend GDP, the UDO, and is consistent with the Aurora Places Comprehensive Plan. It proposes infrastructure and public improvements needed to serve the development, mitigate any potential adverse impacts, and is compatible with the surrounding uses. For that reason, Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the site plan and adjustments on March 8th. 2 appeals were subsequently filed based off the Planning Commission decision. These were received by staff. Cheryl Hutchings, which is an abutting property owner, as well as 26 additional abutting property owners, filed an appeal on March 20th. That was also added by Mr. Will Shippers, who filed on behalf of the Eagle Bend Metro District on March 17th. The appeal objections were based on non-compliance with the Eagle Bend GDP, staff's application of the standards on the proposed project, and the Planning Commission's evaluation of the site plan approval criteria. This appeal public hearing was then scheduled by staff for council's consideration. The question before you this evening is if the body wishes to uphold the decision made by Planning Commission, which approved the Echelon at Eagle Bend multifamily application with adjustments. Staff has confirmed that notice of tonight's public hearing was published in the newspaper, posted on the property, and mailed to abutting property owners not less than 10 days prior to this evening's hearing. Lastly, staff will provide a quick summary of the objections raised by the public through the appeals and a brief response for City of Aurora Planning. The first objection raised by the resident and the districts was that the proposal does not meet the prairie-style architecture required within the GDP. Staff finds that the term prairie style is used as a description to establish the overall vision for the development and is not an architectural style standard. The architecture standards matrix within the GDP establishes architectural style requirements for housing types and planning areas within Eagle Bend, but does not have a style requirement listed for multifamily. The second objection raised by both the residents and the Metro District are that the GDP establishes a 50-foot maximum building height for buildings within the development. Building type 3, which is 5 of the proposed 10 multifamily buildings, exceeds that requirement. Staff found that while the GDP does list a 50-foot building height requirement, the table notes, has a footnote, that the measurement shall be taken as defined within the UDO. Building height measurements within the UDO are defined by section 146-6.2. This states that the height of buildings with sloped roofs, which are being proposed, is determined by taking the average distance between the peak and the eave, taking that point, measuring it to the ground surface elevation within 5 feet of the building's foundation. Using this method, which is consistent on how we apply building height across the city, the proposed building height does meet the established 50-foot requirement of the GDP. Thirdly, the residents have objected that the proposal does not meet or provide the 45% on-site usable open space requirement as defined in the GDP. Staff finds the GDP specifically allows detention ponds to contribute towards the 45% open space requirement as long as it's landscaped and usable. The applicant is landscaping all areas credited towards the minimum requirement and has included a wide walking path around the pond to allow the outdoor space to be more usable. Fourthly, the residents have objected that the proposal or the proposed retaining walls exceed the GDP requirement. Staff finds that the final height and the design of the retaining walls will be determined with the civil review process, and that is still underway. The applicant is working through this design requirement to meet the minimum standards, and it is an ongoing technical comment that will be confirmed prior to construction. You'll notice that the Planning Commission approval does have one condition, which is the resolution of technical comments. Next, the residents have objected that there is a 6-door garage requirement per the GDP, and that multifamily buildings proposed include 8 garage doors. Staff has reviewed this standard, which notes that the GDP only establishes this requirement for elevations with front doors. This is intended to preserve building entries and front facades while pushing the garages to lesser internal facades. Building types 1 and 2 do include 8 garage doors, but these are on These are on the rear facade, which do not contain front doors or building entries. Lastly, the resident has objected that overall the application is not compatible with the use, terms of size, scale, and building facade materials. Staff finds that compatibility is typically evaluated with the applicable standards and that compliance of the standards is generally serving for compatibility. I would also note that multifamily residential and two-family residential uses are commonly considered to be complementary and suitable when placed next to each other. Additionally, the multifamily buildings proposed closest to the existing two-family residences have been reduced by building height. They are only 2- and 3-story buildings. They have provided substantial setbacks, a minimum of 42 feet from the property line, and these contextualize and transition the permitted multifamily density within this existing neighborhood. Lastly, the masonry and siding building materials, numerous gable roof forms, and neutral color tones are consistent with the existing architecture in Eagle Bend. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you, Mayor and councilors. If there are any questions, staff is available to answer them. Thank you.
Presentation by the applicant.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Ashley Bedell, Vice President of Development for the Garrett Companies with offices at 5075 South Syracuse Street in Denver, Colorado. Several of our designers, engineers, and attorneys are here with me this evening as well to assist in answering any questions you may have. Our Echelon at Eagle Bend project received unanimous approval at Planning Commission last month, and tonight I ask that you uphold that decision. Garrett Companies is a national multifamily development, construction, and management company that focuses on the development of Class A boutique-style luxury properties. We've developed in Aurora before and look forward to the opportunity to build here again. Our site is at the southeast corner of East Aurora Parkway and South Quamoy, adjacent to the Heritage at Eagle Bend neighborhood. Since our initial filing in May of '22, we have worked with staff to confirm our project complies with the Eagle Bend GDP and the UDO. This was validated by the approval we received from the Planning Commission on March 8th. The approval came after the Commission's careful consideration of the same issues raised on appeal by the neighbors, which you will hear tonight and I will be addressing in my presentation. The GDP anticipated more intense uses, including commercial and multifamily, would occur along Aurora Parkway, a major arterial. As you can see, multifamily is an allowed and anticipated use on Parcel A, which is our site. The determination for compatibility between multifamily and the attached duplex home to the south was made at the approval of the Sixth Amendment to the GDP. During our early planning for this site, we knew there was existing residential along the southern property line. We were intentional with our layout on how we would transition from the south property line to Aurora Parkway, knowing it would become a 6-lane major arterial in the near future. We've reviewed the GDP and the UDO, paying close attention to setbacks and buffering requirements. The area that you see between the red lines is the 25-foot building setback per the GDP. The blue line you see is a 100-foot setback, which we refer to as the protected lot zone, meaning buildings to the south of that blue line can only be 38 feet tall. You also see the contour lines on this site. We have a great deal of topography that we're working with. From our south property line to Aurora Parkway, going down Quamoy, there's 28 feet of fall. As you move from there, going east down Aurora Parkway towards the fire station, there's an additional 53 feet of fall. We took all of this information into consideration when we determined building type and building placement. Shifting your focus probably a little more to the north side of the property where you see the black arrow. During our 2 neighborhood meetings that we had, a concern we heard from the neighbors was traffic and use of Quamoy. We've taken 2 steps to address this. First of all, we added a left turn lane that's represented by the black arrow on the screen. That allows both eastbound and westbound traffic to enter the project without use of Quamoy. Our traffic study has been reviewed by and approved by city staff. Secondly, we've worked with the president of the HOA and agreed to increase the property's financial contribution to the road maintenance of Quamoy that is stated in the existing easement agreement. You'll also see that a majority of our buildings are located outside of the blue line. Even though they're of a height that's allowed there, we've pushed things as far north as we can. Based on the requirements in the GDP and the UDO, again, we could place a building up to 38 feet tall at the red line and up to 50 feet tall at the blue line. But we went into this project pushing our buildings further north, being aware of the neighbors to our south. Additionally, these buildings sit lower than the Heritage at Eagle Bend homes. Looking kind of at the bottom left corner, there we have about 11 foot of fall, so our buildings are 11 foot lower than the homes, transitioning to the east where we get to about 5 feet. There is a lot of topography on this site, and it has created a lot of challenges in design, but we found the best plan that allows for the connections that we have to make, keeps the streets and the sidewalks at acceptable slopes, but we do this through the use of retaining walls. As Asia mentioned, and as raised in the appeal, the appellants claim there is one retaining wall that isn't in compliance with the GDP. This is a technical issue that we will solve. I can confirm that this will be satisfied upon our upcoming submittals. The topography of the site also generated 2 adjustments, which we have worked with staff and they have confirmed we meet the requirements for. Not only will this project fill a need for middle housing within the city of Aurora, but it will appeal to a variety of residents through 2 different building types, 2 different living options. First, we have the corridor buildings on the northern portion of the site, shaded in the darker blue. These are 4-story buildings that have elevators for convenient use of our residents. Secondly, we have the more aqua-colored buildings at the south, and those are more of a 2.5-story home that's more like a duplex or a townhome. They have direct entries. You can have a garage attached directly to your unit, and there's even 2-story units in there to separate the living from the sleeping areas. This project has 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, all designed with high-quality materials and sought-after features. This is an elevation of our smaller building, the southern half, the aqua ones. Materials are masonry and fiber cement siding, consistent with the GDP and very similar to what's on the homes to our south. Raised on appeal, the appellants claim the garage doors do not comply with the GDP. Per the GDP, no more than 6 garage doors may appear on any multifamily building containing front doors, and the plane of each garage door shall be offset by at least 2 feet from the plane of the garage door adjacent to it. The doors on the elevation with the garages are patio doors. You see I've highlighted the patio railings in yellow just to further demonstrate they're not front doors, and we are in compliance. This is the elevation of our corridor building located on the north half of the site, and these buildings sit at least 250 feet from our southern property line. Between our smaller buildings, the changes in grade, and the increased setback, there is a good transition between the Heritage at Eagle Bend homes and these buildings. Raised on appeal, the appellants claim our buildings exceed the height requirements in the GDP. We've reviewed this point closely and can confirm we are in compliance. This is the chart straight out of the GDP, section 2.1. You can see maximum for multifamily building height is 50 feet, and then I've highlighted the footnote at the bottom that Asia referred to that sends you to city code or the UDO. And again, UDO definition on screen, a point halfway between the eave and the highest point. That is how we're measuring our building height. For our smaller buildings, we're at 30 feet 3 inches. Our corridor buildings, 49 feet 6 inches, both under the 50-foot allowance. As Asia mentioned, and as raised in the appeal, the appellants claim that the building architecture does not follow the prairie theme that they feel is required. While a prairie style is mentioned in the GDP, it is not a required architectural standard. The chart before you is the architectural standards matrix. You can see the box highlighted in yellow would define the architectural style, but that box is blank. Instead of listing an architectural style, there's an entire page of the GDP that provides the multifamily architectural standards. These standards and required features such as pitched roofs, variation in roof lines, complex massing, multiple wall planes are requirements. We don't have the discretion to ignore these items. The images included with the GDP standards show the required elements and characteristics, including a 4-story building, confirming our project's consistency with the vision and standards for this parcel. Regarding open space, as raised on appeal, the appellants claim that the project does not meet the open space requirements because they do not feel the detention area should be counted. Per the GDP, we are required to have 45% of our site as common open space. The area shaded green satisfies that. Staff has reviewed our submittal and confirmed we meet this requirement. The water quality basin can be counted as common open space because it includes the required landscape as well as a path amenitized with benches and fitness stations. The maintenance path, trickle channel, and 100-year elevation have not been counted. They are not shaded. The perception that this is a pond with high-banked sides that aren't usable isn't accurate. Sometimes it's difficult to visualize when you see our plans with the 4-to-1 slope what that really means. These images demonstrate the sloped area that we have shaded green. Staff has completed their technical review and confirmed we're in compliance. The GDP states detention ponds may be used to meet common open space requirements if they are landscaped and can be effectively used for recreational activities. This visual affirms that this area is not unusable open space, but instead an area that will attract residents and encourage recreation. Amenities we offer our residents, in addition to the GDP requirements, we are providing 20% activated open space per the UDO. We are meeting this through the amenities we will offer our residents to include the clubhouse, pool, and an open game lawn area. As you can see, we are under the by right unit count by 108 units. We are providing greater setbacks than required, and we have satisfied both the GDP and the UDO requirements. I'd like to invite our Land Use Counsel, David Foster, to conclude this presentation.
Thanks, Ashley. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll be very brief. It's obviously not good when a lawyer has to present as part of an applicant's presentation on a site plan, but so is the case here because both the applicant as well as the city has already been sued in district court by the neighbors. We've included on page 1177 a letter that's part of the record that speaks to meeting the criteria. This is a site plan appeal. This is not a rezoning. Sections 146-5.4.3.B.2 on site plan criteria and 146-5.4.4 parens D on the adjustment criteria have all been met based on what is already a part of the record. As has been demonstrated by your staff and Ashley, height open space garage doors are objectively reviewed, analyzed, and have been determined to meet this GDP. Architectural style, you've already seen, was left blank intentionally. And the images, although they're not very clear, for sure in that GDP, you will note that those images do appear to include four-story multifamily buildings, much like we've proposed. Is the project compatible with surrounding uses? It's a residential use, and we are immediately adjacent to residential uses. It is a residential use as permitted by right on this site as multifamily, which is to say when it was zoned in 2006, your previous council people already made that determination of compatibility and decided that multifamily on the outskirts of this project was compatible. This isn't a conditional use tonight. This isn't a special review use. This is an appeal of a site plan that has already been unanimously approved by the Planning Commission. We ask tonight that you uphold the unanimous decision of the Planning Commission from last month, and we'll, of course, be available for questions. Thank you.
Presentation by Eagle Bend Metropolitan District.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for your time tonight. Will Skippers on behalf of the Eagle Bend Metropolitan District. The boundaries of the land within the district and the boundaries of the land within the GDP are identical. You received my packet of my comments and exhibits with the exhibit number being noted in the upper right-hand corner of each exhibit, so we can follow along with those as I go. If there were a preamble to this discussion, the following recitals would be mentioned as all parties agree to the following. The Eagle Bend GDP is a governing document for developments within the district. Noncompliance of the GDP would require an amendment to the GDP. The GDP provides standards that are mandatory for all Eagle Bend structures. The GDP standards require all residential buildings within Eagle Bend to be of a 1, prairie-style architecture, and B, harmonious whole design. In the real estate sector, there is consensus that prairie-style means married to the ground with emphasis on the horizontal rather than the vertical. And harmonious whole means items that are coordinated, compatible, matching, and symmetrical. To understand what's required for structures within Eagle Bend per the mandatory standards stated in the GDP, one only need to answer a couple questions. First, what wording was used to describe the standard? Section 1.1 of the GDP states that the following: these separate parts will develop into a harmonious whole through the use of standards and aesthetic principles set forth in these development standards and guidelines. Section 1.2 of the GDP states the following: due to the high plains character and location of Eagle Bend, a prairie-style theme will be developed throughout the community. This character will be carried throughout the project, architecture, and all land uses. Section 1.3 of the GDP states the following: these development standards and guidelines will further describe the standards established in the GDP so that all development within Eagle Bend adheres to an overall theme. The words adhere to an overall theme describe what the author believes is necessary for Eagle Bend to be in a harmonious whole. Section 1.3 also states these development standards and guidelines will be used by the City of Aurora in reviewing the subdivision sites and plans. Regarding building height, a roof plane is the surface of the roof that's pitched or at an angle. It's the biggest and most noticeable part of the roof. The roof ridge is the horizontal line at the top of the roof plane where two roof planes intersect. Section 8.3 of the GDP multifamily architectural standard states the following: roof plane surfaces of 50 feet or more shall not be allowed. As depicted in Exhibit A, the roof plane is 54 feet and 2 inches in height. This standard clearly requires the roof ridge, i.e. the highest point of the roof plane, to be less than 50 feet, not equal to, not greater than. Question number 2, what was the intent of the author of the standards? To answer this question, the answer to this question provides the most important insight as the meaning of the standards. In this case, the author was the developer of Eagle Bend. One only has to look at what developer allowed to be built within Eagle Bend. The intent is demonstrated in the design of the residential structures built in Eagle Bend by the creation of a cohesive, harmonious whole, prairie-styled themed community. Obviously, the purpose of the developer specifying prairie-style and harmonious whole in the GDP was to enforce what the developer intended, and desire to be built, and that is what has been built to date. There are 5 residential communities within the district as depicted on Exhibit B in your packet. These are existing parts mentioned in Section 1.1 of the GDP. Exhibit C provides evidence of extreme difference and lack of harmony among the 5 existing residential areas within Eagle Bend and the proposed 4-story echelon building proposed by Garrett Companies for Echelon at Eagle Bend. Exhibit C.1 is Creekside, Eagle Bend, 149 1- and 2-story single-family detached homes. C2, Ridgeview, Eagle Bend, 318 2-story townhomes. C3, Heritage Eagle Bend, an age-restricted mix of 1,442 single-family detached and 2 to 4-plex homes, all single-story. C4, the KB Homes, 74 2-story homes. C5, the Springs at Eagle Bend, 280 dwelling unit, 2-story multifamily project. You can see that no harmony exists between the echelon building and the existing residential structures. There are no 3 or 4-story residential or commercial structures within Eagle Bend. The Garrett 4-star echelon buildings are more representative of a hotel. In Exhibit D, you can see the harmony that exists between a hotel and the echelon buildings. It is inconceivable that the authors of the Eagle Bend GDP would have ever envisioned a hotel-type building being a part of any residential area within Eagle Bend. The echelon 4-story building type is compatible and harmonious with a commercial neighborhood. Exhibit E depicts the proximity of the Garrett 5, 8, 10 Southlands project to Southlands Mall. One can see Southlands Mall just to the right of the 4-story echelon building. The attributes of this area provide an excellent location for the echelon 4-story building. Exhibit F depicts the route if one drives southwest on Aurora Parkway from Smoky Hill Road to Camoy Way. There are no 3 or 4-story buildings along that route, which is approximately 3 miles. When Aurora Parkway is extended to Parker Road, it is doubtful there will be any 3 or 4-story buildings prior to intersecting with Cottonwood Drive, which is an additional 2.5 miles. Exhibit G provides a depiction of the proximity of the 4-story echelon buildings in the proposed project relative to the abutting property owners in Heritage Eagle Bend. Note that the distance between the 4-story buildings and that of the abutting properties is approximately 400 feet along the west line of the project property and approximately 250 feet in the eastern portion of the property. It is clear that the 4-story echelon buildings are not harmonious with the immediate area of the project, nor within Eagle Bend as a whole, and the GDP does not delineate where a harmonious whole may start or stop within Eagle Bend. In correspondence with the Garrett Companies, the City of Aurora planning staff mentioned that the proposed site development area is within the Eagle Bend GDP, which functions as the planned development zoning for the site. They also mentioned the planned development includes specific guidelines, including but not limited to general development standards such as architecture. An additional comment made by staff is that buildings must also be no taller than 50 feet in height. The planning staff recommendations submitted to Planning Council include the following comments. The application is compatible with surrounding uses in terms of size and scale. The application mitigates any adverse impacts on the surrounding area to the degree practicable. The planning staff also made the following points when submitting their recommendation to the Planning Commission. The proposal is consistent with all applicable standards, including the Eagle Bend GDP. The project is compatible with surrounding institutions and residential uses. One can easily recognize how the project, 1, is not compatible with surrounding uses in terms of size or scale, does not mitigate adverse impacts on the surrounding area, 3, is not consistent with all applicable standards, including the Eagle Bend GDP, 4, is not compatible with surrounding institutions and residential uses. Pardon me? It's a CDC national immunization calling me. So the planning staff never mentioned the requirement for a prairie style type of development, the required harmonious whole design, nor did they mention the 50-foot ground to roof plane height measurement being a standard, the required maximum height that's stated in the GDP. Echelon is Garrett's branding for their high-density product type. The Echelon product type is intended to be within walking distance of dining, shopping, and work. As shown in Exhibit E, Garrett's 5, 8, 10 Southlands project includes the 4-story Echelon building type. This is a perfect location for the Echelon building type, as the location provides dining, shopping, and work within walking distance. The Echelon Eagle Bend project is also planned as a high-density project, but has none of those attributes. Shown in Exhibit C5 is the Continental Properties Springs at Eagle Bend multifamily development, which was built in 2018, only 3/4 mile from the Echelon project. In comparison, its design is similar to the Garrett Caliber product. They received very few comments from residents. Those comments and concerns were quickly resolved by Continental. Continental was aware of the design standards in the GDP and complied with the prairie-style, harmonious whole design when designing the springs at Eagle Bend, as they believed the two-story design was more compatible with and complementary to the surrounding area and neighborhoods. Continental stayed true to the intent of the GDP guidelines for a cohesive, harmonious prairie-style community throughout Eagle Bend. The district feels that Garrett and the city of Aurora should look at the springs at Eagle Bend as an example of the multifamily housing that stays true to guiding principles and standards of the Eagle Bend GDP. The Garrett Caliber product type is a low-density product type that's compatible with Eagle Bend residential structures. Garrett could choose to develop the site with only the Caliber product type with no objection from the district. During the Planning Commission meeting on March 8th, the chair of the commission asked Ms. Fuentes of Garrett why they didn't use the Caliber building type in the project instead of the Echelon building type. Ms. Fuentes replied that they are using the Caliber product in the project. This is correct, and the 5 of the 10 buildings within the project are the Caliber building type. However, nothing was mentioned about the other 5 buildings that are the Echelon 4-story building type, and the chair of the committee did not ask a follow-up question as to why they didn't use the Caliber building type throughout the project. Garrett has developed many mid to low density projects, including several in Colorado. They know how to make a lower density project financially feasible. They've also developed several projects with many fewer dwelling units. They know how to make a smaller project financially feasible. Garrett is choosing to develop this site as a high-density, high-height project. The Garrett website mentions their participation in 63 projects consisting of over 15,000 units. If the project was 160 units versus 260 units, the difference is only approximately 0.5% of the units built. The project at 260 units or 160 units doesn't move the needle for Garrett at all. Garrett has developed 23 projects in Colorado. Only 10 are high density, 13 are fewer than 200 dwelling units. They can make this project feasible with only Caliber buildings and with 100 fewer units. The Garrett project does not move the needle for the city of Aurora and its housing for all principle. This is not an affordable housing project. The project does not lend itself to walking for work, shopping, dining, or recreation. This is not even a family housing project, as Garrett will not even build a playground, relegating the children to play in the detention pond. If the project consists of 160 units rather than the planned 260 units, the impact of the city would be microscopic. A senior member of the planning department mentioned that Garrett has a right to build as designed, and we can't take that right away. Garrett does not have the right to build as designed, as a project design does not meet the standards prescribed in the GDP. We also believe the city of Aurora has a responsibility to enforce the standards as prescribed in the GDP. By approving the project as designed, the city of Aurora is actually granting Garrett a right that Garrett does not have, which is in violation of the GDP. The GDP clearly states these development standards and guidelines will be used by the city of Aurora in reviewing the subdivision and site plans. The project does not reflect the vision, the intent, nor does it meet the required standards provided in the GDP. The city should not grant approval of the project as designed just to allow Garrett to meet financial feasibility at the expense of existing residents. The city of Aurora has no obligation or the authority to allow noncompliance of the GDP standards just to make the project financially feasible or desirable to Garrett. The district requests the city of Aurora not approve the project as designed and recommends Garrett eliminate all 4-story buildings such that the property only consists of their Caliber building type, i.e. the type 1 and 2 building. Following is a critical point for you to consider. Garrett is a merchant builder, meaning they sell their projects as soon as they're stabilized in occupancy and rents. According to the Garrett website, they have sold every one of their Colorado projects once construction was completed and leasing was stabilized. When Garrett recently wanted to relocate their offices, they did not choose Aurora. They moved their office from Lone Tree to the Denver Tech Center. Garrett is not vested in this community and is not demonstrating long-term concern for the effect of the project on the community. So Ms. Fuentes mentioned challenges to the website, to the site. the city certainly should not allow exceptions just because there are challenges to this site. I certainly agree that it's a challenging site, but that does not warrant any exceptions to the GDP. This project does not move the needle for in the haystack for Garrett. It does not move the needle in the haystack for the city of Aurora. But for the residents of Eagle Bend, this project is a haystack. I'm happy to answer questions you may have, but thank you for your time and consideration.
The next presentation is by the appellant, residents of Eagle Bend. Second appellant.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Cheryl Hutchings. I live at 21941 East Canyon Place in Heritage, Eagle Bend, and I am the official appellate on this appeal. I'm going to turn it over to my approved representative, Mr. Jim Folk, who is also a resident at Heritage, Eagle Bend. Thank you.
Good evening, council members and Mr. Mayor. I am James Folk. I live at 7709 South Valde Court in Aurora, and I am speaking on behalf of Cheryl Hutchins, the appellant. Garrett and Aurora Planning state that Echelon was developed to fit nicely next to a single-family, one-story homes. You have heard Garrett state that Echelon meets the usable open space requirement, that the building heights conform to the GDP, that Echelon is compatible with Eagle Bend, and that Echelon conforms to the GDP and is compliant with the UDO. The abutting homeowners and 825 residents disagree. Their signed support is right here in these documents, and there is a list submitted in your package of all those homeowners. This is an accurate rendering showing Echelon's height, scale, mass, and density. It is based on Garrett's site plans. Garrett states that nobody is guaranteed a view. This is a misrepresentation. This is not about views. It is about complying with the Eagle Bend GDP. After hearing our issues, the City Council should vote to send it back to planning for GDP and UDO compliance. The UDO clearly states that established development agreements are the governing regulations and standards, and the UDO cannot modify or invalidate any of the GDP provisions, standards, or guidelines. Yet planning allowed Garrett to ignore the GDP standards. The Eagle Bend GDP guided residential, commercial, and multifamily developments for 24 years. All Eagle Bend communities exhibit complete compatibility with the GDP intent and purpose. It states, and I quote, "All the separate parts of Eagle Bend are developed into a harmonious whole using a prairie-style theme and adhering to the overall theme of the purpose and the intent of the GDP. Echelon is the only Eagle Bend community that deviates from this intent and purpose." The fact that Echelon does not comply with the theme is further supported by the project's violation of the GDP standards to ensure that the Eagle Bend community remains a harmonious whole. Planning stated that Prairie Style is just a reference in the GDP, and it is not an actual design standard. I would emphasize the entirety of the GDP is the design standard. Planning's judgment was solely based on style and building materials. A definition of Prairie Style is easily obtained from multiple sources, stating the most defining characteristics is their emphasis on the horizontal rather than the vertical. Does this slide show Prairie Style? Highland Villas and Ridgeview in Eagle Bend are multifamily communities with two-story homes. These communities fulfilled the Eagle Bend GDP Prairie Style theme of horizontal versus vertical. Echelon does not. The Springs at Eagle Bend apartment complex maintains the Prairie Style theme of horizontal versus vertical. Echelon does not. Garrett says their 2.5-story buildings offer a single-family appearance and feel, yet never mentions the 5 4-story buildings that dominate the site. The Springs at Eagle Bend is a similar community with 280 apartments, 14 buildings on 20 acres. Garrett is squeezing 26% more units per acre, less parking, and less open space. Garrett says they are under the allowed 367 units. That doesn't matter if it doesn't fit. Garrett says that they meet the usable open space requirements. We disagree. Suppose Garrett adopted the Springs approach. This rendering is a side-by-side comparison. Suppose Garrett used their prairie-style 2.5-story building types 1 and 2. Look at the difference. A prairie-style harmonious whole versus non-compliant 4-story buildings. The Springs on the left side reduces the emphasis on the vertical, height, size, and mass. Garrett states that placing 5 4-story buildings 250 feet away from abutting single-family homes minimizes this project's height issues. It does not. The building heights are not GDP compliant. The GDP standard for maximum building height is 50 feet. 5 buildings exceed 50 feet. Planning claimed this requirement is not fully defined. What's unclear about the words maximum height? Garrett states that the 54.5 feet is compliant as measured by city code, and the UDO is city code. The Eagle Bend GDP established in 1999 has the standard maximum of 50 feet. Planning allowed Garrett to utilize a UDO definition adopted 20 years later to get around the non-compliant 4-story building heights. That definition measuring building height does not negate the word maximum. This is not about how to measure building height. The word maximum overtakes all discussion. The GDP clearly states height maximum is 50 feet. There is no ambiguity, and there is no reason to rely on the UDO. On May 19th and October 20th, 2022, these instructions on this slide were sent to Garrett. From the very beginning, planning advised Garrett to limit the building height to 50 feet. What happened? It became clear to HEB residents after commenting on the height that the original ground-to-roof peak measurement was changed. Site plans were revised to show a lower and non-compliant building height. 5 buildings are over 54 feet. They are not GDP compliant. Planning says that the ground-to-roof peak is not commonly used. I will now show some neighboring site plans, each measuring ground-to-roof peak. Here's Ridgeview Eagle Bend. Note the ground-to-roof peak measurement. The Springs at Eagle Bend. Eagle Bend Marketplace. Southland Shopping Center. Saddle Rock Apartments. Most interesting is Garrett's Caliber at Southlands. Basically the same building as Echelon. According to their site plans, it's measured from ground to roof peak. And a 2022 Garrett project, Pomeroy, measuring ground to roof peak. We have reviewed site plans. Contrary to planning's assertion, there are 38 more site plans we have found within Eagle Bend and the surrounding areas using the same ground to roof peak measurements on their site plans. This is another actual rendering based on Echelon site plans of a cross-section of their property. Garrett showed homeowners a rendering of building roof lines that were no higher than abutting HEB homes. That was inaccurate. Place these buildings on the proposed topography, and they are as high as a 6-story building. Planning states that because of the site's topography and other site constraints, they approved exceptions to 2 buildings that did not face streets. We say planning is allowing Garrett to pack too much in too little space. After the May 19th, 2022 pre-application meeting, these open space instructions were sent to Garrett. The detention pond requirement is that it can be effectively used for recreation activities. We ask what happened to these requirements along the way. There is no doubt this pond is not usable open space and cannot effectively be used for recreational activity per the requirement. Earlier, Garrett showed a rendering of the proposed path that encircles the detention pond. Their rendering is misleading. In fact, not shown on their rendering is the 40-foot slope change, 74 7-inch steps, 10 6-inch steps, 25 landings, a path slope of 9.7%, and multiple 3-to-1 slopes, which are not allowed per the GDP 4.1.15 standard. Did you see any of those items in that rendering? Garrett's rendering is wrong and deceptive. The detention pond is not conducive to recreational activities as required and cannot be used by all residents. Any resident with mobility issues cannot easily use the detention pond path. Eliminating the pond area sets the open space at 38%, far below the required 45%. And another GDP noncompliance issue. The GDP sets the maximum retaining wall height of 14 feet. Echelon has 240 linear feet of double 16-foot retaining wall, which is 2 feet more than the standard. Planning said that a review is still underway, but planning submitted a non-compliant project to the commission, yet it advised the commission that the project is compliant. The UDO establishes a project's approval criteria. The commission ignored non-compliant issues. It does not comply with the GDP. 2, it does not improve or expand multimodal connections. The site plan does not show any of those connections. 3, it does not expand existing bicycle activity. Planning indicates there are connections, but there are none on the site plan. 4, it does not achieve compatibility with adjacent neighborhoods in terms of size, scale, mass, and building materials. 5, it does not mitigate adverse impacts on the surrounding areas. Echelon does not have any of the characteristics of the Eagle Bend communities. It does not align with the GDP purpose and intent. No prairie style, no harmonious whole, no compliance to the overall theme. The UDO defines compatible as a determination of compatibility including height, scale, mass, and bulk of structures. Echelon is not compatible with any of the Eagle Bend communities. Never did these 825 residents say, "Not in my backyard." We knew this site would be developed. Planning has stated that, quote, residents did not want this project. That is a misrepresentation. Aurora wants to provide high-quality housing options across all social economic levels, cultural identities, and stages of life. This can still be accomplished while conforming to the Eagle Bend GDP standards. The 825 homeowners respectfully ask the City Council to send this project back to planning to apply all the required standards. Is it appropriate to allow a 14-acre parcel to change the character of an entire 1,018-acre community? We trust you agree the answer is no. Thank you for allowing us to present our case.
And is there anybody who wishes to be heard on this issue that is not associated with either appellants nor the applicant?
Yes, we have 10 individuals who have signed up. The first person is Harry Brust, followed by David Admire.
Good evening, Mayor Kaufman, City Council members. My name is Harry Brust, and I live at 22949 East Long Drive. You may have seen my name in many of the letters and complaints registered with the City of Aurora. I have chosen to lead a group of Heritage Eagle Bend residents, 825 petition signers, not because I'm directly affected by this development. I'm leading this because the project is not sound development for this last 14 acres of the original Eagle Bend development parcel of more than 1,000 acres. There are many concerns that the residents have brought forward, some of which you have heard from Jim Folk tonight. These concerns have not changed from our original letter sent to Asia Tibbs on December 28th of 2022. These concerns have gone unanswered for 4 months, and Garrett and Aurora still claim that the development meets all the requirements of the UDO and the GDP. This is where the disagreements begin in the interpretation of those guidelines. You can argue codes and regulations until you're blue in the face. One code supersedes another, and others don't apply completely or are vague. What this really comes down to are the rights of the residents abutting the development to rely on the Eagle Bend GDP to protect them from the development that is not compatible with the surrounding properties. They have been accustomed to the Eagle Bend GDP type of development for 25 years. You can accuse them of saying, "Not in my backyard," or "We just don't want it." These statements are false, and all the residents signing those 825 petitions knew that one day the property would be developed. They are not anti-development. They counted on it being developed like what has been done in the Eagle Bend GDP, most recently with the Springs at Eagle Bend project. These residents were astounded and surprised when they learned of a development featuring 5 four-story mega complexes shoehorned into 14 acres with inadequate parking, no recreational space for play areas, and no public transit system available. The proposed development was far from being a compatible neighborhood. There are no 4-story complexes within 3 miles of this site. It will be seen like a sore thumb sticking out from as far away as Smoky Hill Road and Aurora Parkway. It is not compatible with the entire surrounding area. This type of development is more suited for areas amongst transit stations, shopping, and business centers. Poor decision on Aurora's planning department. Thank you for your time and allowing us to present our case. Residents, would you please raise your hands if you agree with the statements presented tonight? Thank you. Hopefully the city and Garrett will make the changes needed to comply with the residents' request.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Admire, followed by Doug Markham.
I'm sorry, I should say. Just a correction.
Yeah, I just want to repeat that this is for testimony for individuals not associated with either appellant or the applicant.
Okay. David Admire.
Yeah, but still.
Okay, I'm sorry, he's with the appellant, so Doug Markheim. He's with an appellant. Elizabeth Folk with the appellant. Monica Dell with the appellant. Don Rollins.
With the appellant, I'll wait my.
Okay. Jerry Pettibone.
Yes.
Okay. Would you like a 3-minute comment? You're on the appellant side? Yes, okay. Brady McShane.
Good evening. My name is Brady McShane. I'm a land use attorney at Greenberg Charig, and I'm speaking on behalf of the existing property owner for this development project, Carefree Eagle Bend. First, thank you to staff and council for your time and attention dedicated to this matter. We fully support the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of this project and staff's recommendation of approval to council, which directly refutes the issues raised in the appeal. We also fully support and agree with the project's clear compliance with the project approval criteria as demonstrated by staff and the Garrett companies. Importantly, the approved Eagle Bend GDP is intended for more intense uses given its location near major arterial and commercial uses. To this end, the underlying zoning allows the proposed multifamily use by right, permitting up to 25 units per acre at a 368 unit count. Further, the property was previously approved in 2006 through a vested site plan for up to 400 units. The proposed project at 17 units per acre and 260 units is thus considerably less intense than what is allowed by the underlying zoning and what was previously approved in the 2006 site plan. Building setbacks and parking are also significantly greater than what is required by the zoning. The issues raised on appeal are without merit, as evidenced by the Planning Commission's unanimous approval and as further demonstrated by staff in the council agenda commentary and the Garrett Companies Land Use Council in its letter to City Council dated April 6, 2023. With respect to the architectural theme, the project complies with all applicable architectural standards in the GDP, which were developed to implement the desired character of the community. With respect to building height, project height is clearly subject to the UDO as stated in the face of the GDP, and the project complies with the building height limitations. With respect to open space, the proposed detention basin area is allowed to be counted pursuant to Section 4.5 of the GDP since its design supports recreational activities. With respect to the retaining wall, the issue's been resolved and the revised sheets have been submitted to staff. With respect to garage doors, the requirement only applies to front doors. The garages in question are not front doors and are located along the rear facade. Accordingly, the project's fully compliant and the subject appeal is wholly unsupported. We therefore respectfully request that the City Council uphold the unanimous decision of the Planning Commission and approve the major site plan as submitted. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard? That is not associated with either appellant or the applicant?
That is the last individual.
Very well. Questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor?
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. For staff, I have questions on, you heard a lot of testimony on the GDP versus the UDO. I had asked a question a few months ago about when does the UDO come in play? I was told that the GDP is the guiding document and that everything must abide by the GDP. And the only time that the UDO would come into play is if there was, I guess if there was a question. So is that accurate? If it was not addressed in the GDP?
That's correct. We use the UDO if the GDP is ambiguous or unclear, or if it's specifically referenced in the GDP.
But the UDO was done, what, like in 2000, what, I don't have the time, I guess 2022, when it was redone?
Correct, yes. I am not aware of any changes in the way that building height has been measured since the time of the original adoption. It is a consistent practice to measure building height that way.
Okay. And then on compatibility, I also asked a question of staff on compatibility, and I asked specifically, is it subjective or is it literal? And I was told it was subjective. Is that true?
Brandon Camerata with the Planning Department. As planning staff, we endeavor to objectively apply the regulations that have been produced by the community through the city council. And that is how we approach compatibility, is through those regulations, as compatibility is built into those regulations and the design standards that are incorporated into those regulations.
But would you say it's subjective at times?
When we're applying a regulation, we're looking for objective standards.
But you yourself told me it could be subjective. You told me that.
I believe there's always different opinions about what compatibility is.
Okay. On the parking, so I believe it's 1.5 per unit, and these are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm asking for parking specifically, if it meets, you said it meets our requirements for 1.5 per unit.
It's not 1.5, so it's 1 per unit.
1 per
And then
unit.
there is additional guest parking required, and the application does meet that requirement.
Okay, is there any street parking available?
There is some street parking on the internal street, but they are not allowed to use street parking on Comoy or on Aurora Parkway.
Right, and Aurora Parkway, I mean, no one would want
Right. Who would want
park
to?
there. Okay. On the open space, so the drainage, the detention pond was able to be counted towards open space, that's correct?
Yes, correct.
And when we say recreational, abilities, is there recreation that can be, the topography is very different there. There is the detention pond. I don't see anyone playing in the detention pond.
Sure, so recreation for open space is different than recreation for parks or developed parks. Open space is meant to be an open, unprogrammed area, and we commonly allow and count open areas towards open space credits when they have a path or an ability to walk through it and enjoy the open space.
Okay. And then what about park requirements? Was there a park requirement?
There was not. The pros department requested a cash in lieu.
So obviously, that is something within our guidelines, not with the developer, but probably need to change that in the future, because this will have children in these apartment buildings, and there is no pocket park, there's no neighborhood park nearby, there's no transportation. What about traffic? When the traffic study was done, does that anticipate the future connection to Kings Point?
I can't speak to that. Can I ask the applicant or traffic with city staff?
Sure, to the applicant.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm sorry. Can you repeat one more time so I can determine if it's best for me or our traffic engineer?
Sure. The question was on traffic, and I know you do, the traffic studies,
Yes.
but were those traffic studies taking into account the development of Kings Point, which is actually in application with the city currently, that they will eventually open up that Aurora Parkway and extend it to Parker? So was that traffic study, does it project that traffic flow?
Yes, our traffic study looked at both current conditions today and then also once the Aurora Parkway improvements are made.
So how would that be determined if you don't, I don't know how you determine future usage. Kings Point will have 1,700 homes, and it's not just the homes that'll be built. Obviously, your development, all the developments that are nearby will, right now they don't have access to that. They usually use E470. So there will be a lot of traffic going through Aurora Parkway once that opens up. So is there a way how do you project that?
It is a much more technical projection than I can speak to as to how you predict based on what a typical subdivision, a typical apartment project, how many trips are generated. And if you want more detail, I'd be happy to have our traffic engineer speak to that.
Okay. And then, since you're up here, I'll go ahead and move on to my questions for the applicant. On the height, was there a consideration to lower the height at all during this process?
We definitely listened to the neighbors and looked at all questions brought before us. The GDP requires many factors. I couldn't adjust the slope of the roof because that's required. So that's what's also generating the height.
But you heard at 2 public hearing, or neighborhood meetings, I should say, the request to lower from the 4-story to the 3. Was that ever considered in the planning of the design of it?
We looked at many factors and many options for the property as we were in our early development and also going through the neighborhood meetings.
And so why was 3-story not considered, to just reduce it from 4 to 3?
Just looking at how we would satisfy all of the requirements in the GDP beyond just the question on building height, it did not work for the project.
But the GDP doesn't require you to have 4 stories. You can go below.
Correct. We could have gone with a lower height, but the GDP allowed the height. We were by right with that height and with that density.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is you did not consider lowering it to 3 stories.
We considered it and looked at it internally and made the decision to stick with the plan that was presented.
Okay, and then I think that's it on the applicant. Thank you. I do have another question for staff, and I know we keep hearing about the GDP versus the UDO. What was the amendment number 6 that happened in 2006 that changed that zoning of that parcel, correct?
It's unclear. I think it is entirely possible that it was designated for market rate multifamily use much earlier than that.
That's not what I see in the GDP.
Well, I've looked at older versions of the GDP that do allow multifamily use on this parcel. The 6th Amendment did add a significant number of design standards for multifamily projects, and so it references this parcel. It's kind of unclear if it actually was an allowed use earlier. But we do know that the Amendment 6 is what currently stands and does allow this use on the property.
Does anyone remember, because I wasn't on council and none of us were on council back then, why that 6th Amendment was approved by council? I think it was because an assisted living facility was supposed to come in, possibly, and that assisted, even though we heard earlier that would still allow a large number of units, I believe that facility was going to be lower in height. So it would, most of the assisted living in our area in Southeast Aurora are not, huge height. They're lower. So I think that was the reason.
So I can't speak to that. I do know that it was a zoning amendment, which is not a condition of the site plan or the approved site plan. It was a zoning change. So either way, regardless of the site plan proposed, it's an amendment to the zoning that allows the use.
Okay, and then can I ask a question
Please proceed.
The appellant?
Please proceed.
So to the Metro District appellant?
Yes.
When you had the neighborhood meetings, did anyone address the reducing it from 4-story to 3-story? Was that brought up by residents?
I can't tell you specific questions that were asked about actually that exact topic. However, the crux of the meeting was based on the height of the buildings. I can't tell you any direct question that was asked. But that really is the crux of the issue for the district and many of the residents is the height of the building.
So your objection is not to apartment buildings per se?
Correct. So in 2017, when Continental Properties came to our community and wanted to build the Springs at Eagle Bend, it's 280 units, and there were no objections from the district, no objections from any homeowners associations in the area. There were 3 or 4 neighbors across Aurora Parkway on the south side that raised some concerns, and those were addressed by Continental. Actually, the Continental people went to the homes of those people and talked to them, and those concerns were immediately remedied. And one way they did it was, because I just talked to the Continental people last week about that, and they actually had site pictures like was shown here by Mr. Folk, and to see how that was not going to block views and that was going to be compatible with their homes. The KB Homes people right next to it, you know, those are twin townhomes. There was never any objection from anybody, any residents within Eagle Bend to that project.
Yeah, I was present during when those were both built.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know, the Springs and the other one, and I didn't hear any objections from residents on those.
Right.
So, okay, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
One more question, I'm sorry, for the applicant, and it was said earlier that that the company would sell the project after it reaches a certain occupancy. Can someone address that from the applicant?
Hi, regarding if we will sell a property or retain it. In the development world, we always identify our sites and build them like we're going to hold them forever. There comes a time when you finish construction and you stabilize and you look to refinance out of a construction loan. At that point, sometimes market conditions encourage a developer to sell. I can't tell you what we'll do with a project currently under construction or one that's early in planning, but we always build projects at sites that we believe in and that we intend to hold.
And I was present for both of the neighborhood meetings. I do remember that it was stated that you guys have a, want to be involved in the area for a long time to come, and I guess what I'm hearing is that you probably will sell once the occupancy, when it is occupied, or it may happen.
It's possible. I have no idea what the economy will do right now, tomorrow, versus 5 years from now. So, but we have our own management company because we do self-manage properties.
Okay, maybe that's what I remember hearing, is that you have your own management company. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. This question is for staff. Can you please clarify how a gable roof is to be measured per our code?
Yeah, excuse me, per our code, there's 2 points of height, obviously the top and the bottom. The top point, because it's sloped, is measured from the eave and the peak of the roof. So that midpoint down to the base elevation within 5 feet. And that is kind of confusing because there's some different options in our measurements. If you have a sloped roof or kind of a walkout basement scenario, the applicant is grading their foundations flat on both sides within 5 feet. So it's essentially the foundation to that midpoint is their building height.
Can you also define go over how we define a plane on a roof?
A plane on the roof? I think a plane would generally be the slope of the side of a gabled roof or a ridge.
All right, so not the ridge.
Not the ridge would be the top. So it would be the point between the ridge and the eave that's connecting. That would be the slope.
Right, thank you. And then I have another question for the applicant. I'd like y'all to explain how you went and selected your materials. How did you get the finishes, the palette, and what was the inspiration?
Good evening. I'm assuming with your question you mean of the exteriors of the building. I think through several things. We looked at the GDP and we looked at the surrounding area, and we came up with a neutral palette using masonry materials and fiber cement siding that are long-lasting. And I think beyond just the materials on the building, the same with our landscape materials that will be throughout the property.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
So I have a handful of questions. First, I have some questions for the appellant. about some of the points that were raised. I think it would be the second appellant. I think both of these would apply to that appellant, not the first. So first, there was a point mentioned about public transit and the lack of public transit in the area, which I've found to be a concern for a long time. But my question is, if public transit were to be planned and implemented in this area, would it be desired and used such that it would provide enough ridership to sustain that public transit?
Yeah, I don't believe I mentioned anything associated with public transit.
Okay, maybe it was
I
a
think
comment
it
or
would- I think it
after.
was the Metro
Okay,
Board.
well, I just, that, I think, or wait, no, it was the first appellant, I'm sorry, that talked about the fact that this is more suitable to areas with public transit. So I guess my question would be, would you all want public transit and use it, and would that be sustainable for your area?
I think you're talking about me.
Yes.
Please identify yourself for the record as well.
Pardon me?
Please identify yourself for the record when you speak. Thank you.
Will Skippers, on behalf of Eagle Bend Metro District.
Yes.
So my comments there were relative to the echelon building type, the 5 buildings that we're really contesting, so to speak, and that those are typically located in more commercial areas, and those would typically be within walking distance of dining, recreation, shopping, and work. And this site, you cannot walk, you can walk to one restaurant, and that's it. Really, there's no employment, there's no recreation within walking distance of this site. So it doesn't necessarily lend itself to, this hotel type of 4-story structure like you'd normally see around a commercial development, like Southlands Mall was the example I used.
Right. So to my question, though, do you think that your area would desire or use public transit sufficient to merit, provide enough ridership to sustain public transit?
I think both of those, and actually that's a very good point. There's a couple areas. So Heritage Eagle Bend is an age restricted, so you have a lot of people there that get to a point they can't drive anymore, and so public transportation would be an excellent amenity. But not only that, once Garrett builds the Echelon project, hopefully with all of the caliber type buildings only, but we'll have 2 major apartment projects within 3/4 of a mile of each other, and we have Interstate 70, and so many of those people hopefully would make themselves available to the public transit system. So what you can do, we'd be happy to work with you on that as a metro district.
Okay. I mean, I do think, to your point, that increased density helps to support public transportation.
Justify it, absolutely.
And availability. And then my other question, because kind of both appellants mentioned this, the total number of units as well as the height. So if the total number of units that are permitted by right, which it sounds like from the applicant would be 360, if that total number of units could be achieved with a lower height, would that be accepted?
Yes, that'd be probably a little bit challenging, quite frankly. But yeah, if they could do that, we're not. If it would have been 300 units, we've never argued about the number of units. It's just a matter of how you get those units into that site. It's a very challenging site.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you, because I now have some questions for the applicant related to that. So
Thank you.
So yes, I have a few questions for the applicant. The first is about the density. You stated that you reduced the number of units that you could build by right by 100. And so my question is, why did you reduce the total number of units? And would it be possible to develop the total of number of units permitted by right with a lower height? And using this caliber building type that the neighborhood is saying they support.
Okay, I'm going to break that down into a couple, and then
Yes,
if I miss
sorry, that is
something,
kind
please
of
come
a
back and let me know.
question.
So I guess maybe your first question, I think, is how did we establish the unit count that we're at, is maybe the best spot to start with. And I think some of that, before we even had a site plan that we shared with anyone. We do many iterations in our office, going through the GDP, looking at all the standards. We're focused a lot on the buildings, and I understand they're a critical part, but we also have parking requirements. In this GDP, it's not only how many cars per unit, but it's how many garages per unit, and then further, how many attached garages per unit. It's also the open space requirement. So without really sitting down with our engineers and our planners, I can't tell you, could we do A, B, or C? I can tell you, most projects we go through dozens of site plans. This one, we probably went through close to 50. It's, you pull out the sketch paper and you're working through options. Why did we? You can see from kind of the open space plan, there's only so much land to work with for the buildings. So I don't know how to come back and say we could hit these unit counts with all of the caliber buildings. There's only so much space to work with on this site. And we tried to be very conscious early on by placing the smaller buildings adjacent to the single family, to the existing Heritage at Eagle Bend homes.
Okay. So it would not, it sounds like, be physically possible to build the 360 units that you could build by right on this site while having parking, open space, and only using the caliber buildings. Would that be an accurate statement?
I don't know, because I think where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, could we do some type of parking structure? I don't know off the top of my head if that would be allowed. Could I, do basements and have, units that only have windows coming out of the ground that much? But I don't.
Okay, but the caliber buildings wouldn't have garden level type apartments,
No.
right? That's not part of that design.
No.
Okay, so using that design, that caliber design, it wouldn't be possible.
No, it would not work for us.
Okay. And then, sorry, I do have one other question, if you don't have anything else to say on that. And that's with respect to water use. So this is just a consistent question that we receive around development. So I know you brought this plan forward before the city had implemented our new development restrictions around water, and also am fully cognizant that this is in a community with a golf course. But I am wondering if there are any efforts being made with respect to water conservation in your open space and with your other landscaping.
I did not bring a landscape architect with me tonight because honestly, we have not had a ton of landscape questions, so I apologize.
It's okay.
We always endeavor to use as many native plants and species to reduce irrigation. So I can tell you that that's kind of a company practice, to use as many native plants as we can. I don't recall off the top of my head if we are meeting the newer landscape standards or not. I know they were shared with our landscape architect, who's working on other projects in Aurora as well, and he's very aware of those and cognizant of that.
Great, and obviously you guys don't have lawns because it's multifamily, so no problem. And yeah, thank you. I think that's all the questions I have for you all, and then I have one question for staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So for staff, with respect to the open space, you kind of talked about this a little bit with Councilmember Bergen's questions, but you stated that kind of the standard for detention pond to be included in the open space requirement is the ability to walk through and enjoy the open space. I'm wondering, the statements that were made about the 40-foot slopes and the 7-foot stairs with 4-foot landings that were presented by the appellant, does that fit with those standards? in terms of where they are on the site, does it impede people's ability to use the walking paths and other amenities? Like, I'm trying to understand how those two things are compatible, the 7-foot stairs and 4-foot landings and the ability to walk through and enjoy the open space.
Yeah, I mean, I think the standards do not necessarily require the paths to be accessible or fully accessible. And I feel like that might be part of the conversation that the residents are stating, that they're concerned that it's not fully accessible. We don't have all open spaces, certainly private open spaces, meeting fully accessible standards. That's not a requirement of the GDP or the UDO. But it is still a path that will be open and available to the residents, and certainly something that the applicant is proposing in this submittal that doesn't exist today. So they're, doing what they can to amenitize that space, to bring an open path for people to use and share. The slopes around the path don't make it less enjoyable. Obviously, undulating slopes or moving slopes on a hillside are still just the same as a flat one. So I don't think that necessarily changes the description of whether it's usable or not.
Okay, so is the slope of the path itself all meeting accessibility requirements, including for people who may have mobility needs?
I think that there are stairs on a portion of them, so that would not obviously be accessible.
Okay, and does that put the city or the owner of the site at any kind of risk with respect to the ADA?
No. Building and Fire Life Safety reviews a plan for accessibility requirements. They are required to provide an accessible route directly between the parking areas and the entries of the buildings or any accessible units. Those are being provided in the site plan.
Okay, so the open space is not required to be accessible?
It is not.
Okay. Well, that's concerning, but thank you for answering the question. That's all I have, Mayor.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember Lawson.
Yes, I have a question for the applicant. If you could just come up. My question to you is, you've used throughout this argument, the UDO and GDP. And you're just saying because we're following the UDO and GDP. But what about, I don't know the philosophy of your company, but what about just being a company that could just do what the residents want and lower the roof or lower the rooftops? I mean, you're using that as, we can just do this. But what about just doing that, like just making it lower? What would be different with the standard? Is that just the philosophy of your company? We're just going to, because you said that you do 50 site plans. You sit down and your developers or whatever look at 50 site plans. Oh, if you're looking at 50 site plans, are they all the same type of roof? Okay, then my question is if that's the case, then why can't there be some reasonable within your, just beyond the GDP, just being a good organization in terms of being reasonable and working with neighbors, especially in this area? Why can't you maybe go with the roofs being lower and accommodating some of these things that the residents are really wanting to make it all, everybody kind of jive in together? I guess I'm just trying to understand, you did 50 site plans, but we're going by the UDO and all of that. So can you just explain, is that just the philosophy of your company, or is that just because you can do it because you can?
I think we have.
Basically, I mean.
No, I think there's a few goals we wanted to achieve with this. We have several projects where we have a lot of success when we have what I'm going to call two different building types. Some people may prefer to live in a 4-story building with an elevator. You don't typically put elevators in buildings, and I say typically, there's always an exception, so I recognize that. But you don't typically do an elevator in a building that's 2 or 3 stories. Some people like the idea
Please proceed.
of walking into a lobby, having an enclosed corridor that then they take an elevator up to their unit. Some people like to be on a higher floor, so the corridor buildings provide that as an option for that type of living. Some people prefer a 2-story unit where maybe your kitchen and your living room are on one level and the bedroom's upstairs. And having your own private front door so you don't have to go through a corridor. By having two different product types, this allows us to offer more options to residents. To your point of why can't we make all of the buildings the same? What did we do to be considerate of the neighbors? And we put the two-story buildings, or I'm sorry, the 2 to 3 story buildings, the smaller buildings, up against the neighbors, as opposed to doing 4-story buildings across the entire project.
But I think from the argument that I heard is that it's not so much the buildings that you have there, it's the height of the roofs. And I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. You're telling me about the different project types. You can probably still have that, but you could still have a lower, you don't have to have the height of this roof. I guess I'm just trying to understand, is that just your philosophy of your company, or is it just, why can't you do that?
When you talk about the height of the roof, are you talking
I'm
about how
talking
many-
about the slope here, that the complaint that we're talking
Oh,
about.
the slope of the
four-story,
roof?
yes.
The GDP requires a minimum 512 roof slope. So the roof slope to me is different than building.
Okay,
height.
sorry,
I'm
the roof slope.
The roof slope is required to be a minimum, I believe, 512 per the GDP. And then the GDP also in that architectural standards table has a list of features that we have to meet, I believe, 5 of. And one of those is actually increasing the roof slope to 612.
Okay. Thank you. Can I just ask the staff a question? So with her saying that, is that they have to meet 5 of the requirements? Is what she's stating, the applicant, is that something that cannot, that you actually don't have to do that? They don't actually have to meet that, or do they have to meet that in a 4-story?
There is a menu of options.
Okay,
that they
there's
can
a
choose
menu
from.
of options. So they can select from those options?
They can.
Okay, correct. Okay, thank you for that. Then my second question to not to the applicant, but to staff is, you're doing a retention wall that hasn't even been developed, even it's still being thought about. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how you're going to develop you have this development, but you don't even know what the retention wall, what the soundproof is going to be. You have like no idea, but we're still going to do this development, but we really don't know what the retention wall is going to be. So I guess I'm trying to understand, in the development world, how can you do that? Because there may be issues with where the development is versus the retention wall.
Sure. So the Planning Commission approval has a condition to approve with technical corrections. Grading changes and shifts frequently up until construction drawings are finalized. The only way we can move forward with a planning application is knowing that some of those grading details will continue to get worked out when construction occurs. It will be a requirement that they still comply with the standard, and their civil drawings and documents won't be approved until they do prove that they're complying with that standard.
Okay, Mayor, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Very well. Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I have an additional question for the applicant. And this is regarding the paths around the retention pond. I do see that there are stairs along the northern portion. It looks like several sets in quick succession. And along the southeastern bend, it appears that there are very long steps, maybe not too dissimilar from what we have here in Chambers. And from an accessibility standpoint, I'm wondering if you had all considered trying to accommodate ramps and landings on the southern approach. Just based off of what I'm looking at here, I haven't been to the site, it does look like that would be the easier stretch to accommodate something like that in.
I believe that has been reviewed, and I'm happy to take that back to the team as we go through the technical rounds and as we work through civil CDs to just confirm that we have ramps anywhere possible.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant? I have one question for the second appellant, which is Heritage Eagle Bend residents. I'm just wondering if you could put up on page 5, the site plan on page 5. Can you put that up? Back up.
Page 5 of which?
Your particular, I think it's, it was a site plan with, okay.
This one?
Okay. Okay, I'm going to use your site plan to ask a question of the applicant right now, and I'm sure to come back to you. But to the, if you could stand by, and then to the applicant, I wonder if you could comment on this site plan as, is this accurate in terms of your understanding of the site plan?
Without reviewing all of the base files that go into building a rendering, I can't say it's accurate or not. It is representative of us having 4-story buildings. I don't know the detail that their consultant had as far as our grading plans because we're still working through our civil CDs.
Does that accurately depict the elevations, just in terms of the terrain? The ground?
Yes, there is movement in how the buildings sit higher than Aurora Parkway. I can't say it's perfectly accurate, but I'm also not going to sit here and point out every spot I see that might not be perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. To the appellant.
Do you want to add to my response?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, sorry,
I
please.
had the engineer whispering in my ear, and as she's looking at the elevation, it actually goes down.
Because it does look stark.
Pardon?
I'm going to say it does look stark.
Yeah, it looks like all of the buildings are at the same elevation, and that's not actually the way in which the topography works on this site, as it would kind of come down as we move in this direction.
Okay, very well.
So it isn't, but that's because they don't have base drawings for topography to stick these buildings on there.
A response by the appellant.
These are as accurate as we can get based on the site plans that were published. One of the reasons it doesn't go down in slope is the far buildings on the right. The distance between the Aurora Parkway and the base of the building is like 5 feet. But as you go to the buildings all the way to the left, that left building, the berm rise from Aurora Parkway to where that building is beyond those double retaining walls is 25 feet. So at one of the meetings, the online meetings, I personally asked the engineer, why couldn't you create a grade going down to mimic the slope of Aurora Parkway? And the answer was, we cannot do that because of buried utilities. So it is accurate, in our opinion, and our engineers took Google Map searches and used the site plans to make it accurate.
Right. Thank you.
And
further,
might I add, Garrett doesn't show this drawing. They had ample opportunity to be able to create this, but they never did.
Thank you. Further questions of staff, either staff applicant or either appellant? Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you. I had forgotten to ask to staff on fire access. Did that meet all the requirements for the fire truck to be able to get into the development from either access point?
Yeah, I believe so. So they have to get the fire lane access comes from that internal lane, that internal street.
The one in the middle?
Yes, the one in the middle.
Off of Aurora Parkway?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then there's also an additional point of fire access that will go through Eagle Bend that's already pre-existing, and that will be gated.
By Quemoy?
Mm-hmm. No, not by Quemoy. It's on the backside of the site into Eagle Bend.
Okay, is there somebody else, maybe from the appellant, that, because I know you guys worked on the fire access, so maybe, I don't know, Metro District, do you have any information on the fire access?
I can put up a site plan.
My name's Steve Hungerford from Heritage Eagle Bend. There is a fire access gate on Canyon Place, which runs east and west on the backside of the development.
Okay.
And it's been there for years, and it is part of the fire access plan.
And there's a gate there?
There's I think it's a chain.
A chain, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
will that,
We have those in different places throughout the community one between us and Inspiration, one between us and Travoy, so that in dire emergencies that the fire department can access.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay?
And then for staff, I would imagine there'll be children in the apartment complex. We've already talked about there's no park, but what about school bus access? Where would the bus access, over to the
I'm
applicant?
going to let them, they've spoken with APS
Okay,
about
thank you, sorry.
Yeah, we did reach out to Aurora schools after this question was raised to us, and they have not responded with the school bus location,
So.
or a bus stop location. We know that the Heritage at Eagle Bend residents do not want it to be on Quamoy, so we will work to find a location within the community that's acceptable to the schools.
Okay, so, I mean, there is no, you have to take a car to get anywhere, so I'm trying to think, staff, you can't tell me where there's a bus stop, I mean, a school bus stop right now in the area closest to it?
No, that's the
Okay.
Cherry Creek School District determines.
So it's up to Cherry Creek School District. So when, for the applicant, when would you get that information? Before you start building?
We contacted the school district to ask them if they could work with us on a school bus stop location, and they said it was too early. We will continue to reach out to them as we develop our civil CDs and work to establish that spot. We'll continue to follow up.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor,
Councilmember Jurenski.
yeah, we've heard that 825 residents have signed that they're against this. Can I get the total population of residency in Heritage Eagle Bend from anybody?
There's 1,442 homes and approximately 2,500 residents.
So I just would like to state, I mean, I see all of you here tonight, and obviously, you know, you guys are the ones most passionate about this. I have received several emails from Heritage Eagle Bend residents supporting this development. So I just want to make that known. I understand your own board, your own HOA board supports this development. So, you know, it kind of puts all of us in a tough place, and maybe, you know, they're like the silent majority or something like that. I don't really know what to say, but publicly, I am saying, if there's 2,700 residents and 825 have signed that they're against this, there are emails supporting this development.
Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. This is germane to the rendering that's still up about in front of us, and those of y'all know that my background's in AEC, so there are a lot of issues with this rendering as presented. I think that the applicant mentioned that their engineer was utilizing public domain GIS data. This wasn't actually surveyed professionally. And I just want to draw your attention to the building on the rightmost portion of the rendering. You can see that it is floating with the windowsills for the bottom floor units. If I had to eyeball it, I'd guess somewhere about 10 to 15 feet off of the ground. No one builds that way. I think these are going to be a lot lower due to all the site work that's going to be done there. So I'll say they did a great job replicating the elevation in terms of the design of the overall building, but the height, I don't think is, I think that's a really rough guess.
Further, I'm sorry. Further questions of staff, the applicant, or either appellant? Seeing none.
I have one more, I'm sorry.
Okay.
For staff, on traffic again, for the access from Aurora Parkway into the development, will there be a signal?
No, there will not. And Carl, I'm going to let Carl speak to that. He is with our traffic.
Okay.
Hi, Carl Harleen. I'm a principal engineer of the Traffic Engineering Division of Public Works. Right now, the TIS that was reviewed and approved by staff does not indicate that a signal will be warranted by the year 2045.
Okay, so if there's no signal and you are you're coming in from Aurora Parkway. I guess if you're making a left, if you're going south and making a left turn, you're probably okay, but if you go the other direction, would you be constrained by trying to make that turn?
Are we speaking of the access that is directly onto Aurora Parkway? So the westbound left in would be stop controlled. So that would be a yield condition for that westbound left turn in to oncoming Aurora Parkway traffic.
Okay.
And they would have to yield that ingress, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Very well. Further questions of the applicant, of staff, the applicant, and either appellant? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed, and a motion is in order. I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that we were entitled to a short rebuttal, and I would just make this couple of comments that much of the conversation tonight is about this document from 2006 that you as City Council approved. And this document, the GDP, allows for 25 units to the acre and allows multifamily on this site. And I understand some of the questions tonight, Councilwoman Lawson, speaking to, can't you just reduce the height? And the reality is we deal in a world where we're not the property owners. And so the property and its value is a creation of that which you gave to it back in 2006. Because you as a city council, and not actually you, but your predecessors, you did this. And so you created in 2006 this entitlement. Can they build less than 50 feet in height? Yes, they can. And we actually have 5 buildings that are less than 50 feet in height. And we've placed 5 of those buildings in closest proximity to our neighbors.
Mayor, point of order.
So, Councilmember Morgan.
We don't have rebuttals during public hearings.
Okay. Please conclude your remarks.
Did you say, excuse me?
No, please conclude.
Oh, okay. Again, it's just an important fact to note that the density is all allowed, the height is allowed, and although...
Okay, please conclude your
I'll go
remarks.
ahead
Thank you.
and take
Okay,
this.
very well. Public hearing is now closed. Motion is in order.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Move to approve 11A.
Been moved by Councilmember McConnell, seconded by?
Zavonic.
Seconded by Councilmember Zavonic to approve item number 11A. Discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. First, I want to thank the community for getting organized and coming out to testify before us, and for this presentation. I actually found this very, very helpful. As I mentioned, my background is in architecture, engineering, and construction services. I took some time to run through this packet that you provided here, and I am very grateful because what this allowed me to confirm was that the architectural style is actually very much in harmony with a lot of the developments that you put in here. You have similar slopes, you have similar eaves, materials, reveals, glazing, muntins, framing, et cetera. They're virtually identical, especially when you get into the townhomes. So from my perspective, and maybe we just have a point of disagreement here, but I think this is actually very much in harmony with what's already built around here. The challenges of the site, that's fine, you're free to disagree. The challenges of the site here, I understand. I also want to point to Exhibit D here, which I appreciated. The height is the common factor between the building here presented to us in Exhibit D. And that's pretty much it. The color palette, the materials, the general styles, all of that is different. This has cornices, it has a flat roof, it has molding that is present nowhere on the existing developments or in Echelon. There are no balconies, there are no reveals, there are arches. And this is kind of like a low-rent Santa Fe style, if I had to give it a quick name here, as opposed to what the proposal before us with Echelon is, which is, again, very much in harmony with the prairie style. It's just taller for the 4-story buildings. The 3-story buildings look even more similar to the townhomes and some of the other developments in the area. So I appreciate all of the effort y'all put into this, and thank you for the information.
Further discussion?
Mayor.
Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you. And although you will be told that it meets all the requirement for the code for the, from the Planning Commission, from the planning staff, I personally have issues with the fact that we are supposed to be guided by the GDP, and there are some inconsistencies between the GDP and the UDO, and obviously the UDO came way later. And really, planning development documents are supposed to be the guiding document. My issues are with the height primarily. If you have been to this site, you will see that the topography is very challenging. It is difficult, and that's why you will see no park there. You have the detention pond. I do have an issue that we. And again, it's not towards the applicant. I know this is in our code that staff is allowed to take money in lieu of requiring a park. It causes a lot of problems. I'm the council member, the ward council member for this area. I will get the complaints when the traffic is causing problems. I will get those complaints. I will get the complaints that kids have no place to play, that they're, going into the detention pond. And I just think, taking money when we're not even considering the quality of life for our residents, that, again, it's not on the applicant, it's on our code that we probably need to change. I don't think that's right. I do think the traffic is going to be a huge issue. We're not planning for future traffic, which is going to happen when Kings Point North comes in, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. Certainly, if there's not going to be a signal there, we're going to have those issues. I also think the problem with the fact that, no, it's not near any kind of transit. I guess you could walk to Southland Shopping Mall, but that's quite a trek. And so, again, it's going to require people to be in their cars. I don't think the parking is sufficient. I know it meets code. Everything meets code, but it's not sufficient. There's no street parking allowed. So where are those cars going to be? Where are the guests going to park when they come to visit? And it's also it's not an age-restricted complex, which means, again, there'll be children in that area or in that apartment complex. So for those reasons, I am not in favor of upholding the Planning Commission decision. I don't think it is compatible.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, call for the question on item number 11A.
And to clarify, this is to uphold the Planning Commission's approval of the site plan and adjustments.
Oh, was there?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Just clarifying.
Okay.
Mayor Kaufman?
Mayor votes no.
Councilmember Murillo? Thank you. The motion passes with 8 yes votes and 3 no votes. The no votes from Mayor Kaufman, Councilmember Lawson, and Councilmember Bergen to uphold the Planning Commission's approval.
Will the clerk now please read the title of item number 13A?
Item 13A is finalizing ordinance 2023-11, rezoning a parcel of land measuring 2.14 acres, more or less, located at the southwest corner of Smith Road and Sable Boulevard, City of Aurora, County of Adams, State of Colorado, from mixed-use corridor zone district to business tech zone district, and amending the zoning map accordingly.
The time is now 9:15. Council will stand in recess until 9:30.
2.14 acres, more or less, located at the southwest corner of Smith Road and Sable Boulevard, City of Aurora, County of Adams, State of Colorado, from mixed-use corridor zone district to business tech zone district, and amending the zoning map accordingly.
Brandon Camerata with the Planning Department. I'm here to answer any questions on second reading of this rezone amendment.
Mayor, I don't think your microphone is on.
Questions to staff? Seeing none, motion is in order.
Mayor, motion to approve 13A.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by
Mayor, second.
Second by Councilmember Lawson to approve item number 13A. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, the question before us is the adoption of item number 13A. Call for the question.
The motion passes with 6 yes votes and 4 no votes. The no votes from Councilmember Medina, Marcano, Coombs, and Murillo to approve ordinance 2023-11.
Thank you. Reports. Want to say that very concerned about the public invited to be heard against Councilmember Sundberg, and I've asked the city attorney to draft a memo as to what is permissible and what is not, given the First Amendment. I don't want to be baited into litigation against the city, but I look forward to that memo from the city attorney. I was at had the opportunity last weekend to be with AFR in Station 8 on a 24-hour shift, and just very proud of the professionalism of our firefighters. It was a slow night, which was very unusual. We only had 4 emergency calls between the ladder truck and the engine truck. And I want to say that I actually made all those calls. It wasn't like the first time I did a 24-hour shift and I missed the first call at night, late at night. But it was it was slow, which was great for the city. Firefighters don't like it, but it was great for the city, for their area, for Station 8. And when it was slow, they engaged in training, and it was interesting to observe that and to upgrade the professionalism, or to maintain the professionalism. Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. For my Federal, State, and Intergovernmental Relations Committee report, Senate Bill 23-213, the land use bill was laid over for further discussion in Senate appropriations today and has not yet been rescheduled. The legislation that was emailed to council members and the mayor, Senate Bill 23-291 utility rates, was taken to Pfizer on April 21st and will be brought forth at a study session on May 1st for discussion. HUD Assistant Secretary Dr. Kimberly McLean will be visiting Aurora to tour some of the city's affordable housings, and I think they're coming tomorrow. And myself, along with Councilmember Bergen and Councilmember Jurinski, we attended the Tuesday Aurora Scholars, so it was a very great event as always, and that's my report for this week. Thank you, Mayor.
And I just want to thank the library and Cultural Services for the extraordinary job they did in the scholarship program for over 2 nights, and just amazing, the families that really appreciate that.
And Mayor, just to say something, just looking at the pictures, you're on every single one.
I think it's planned that way. Councilmember Jurinski. I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Gardner.
No report.
Councilmember Jurinski.
No report.
Councilmember Zvonek.
No report.
Councilmember Murillo.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayor. I'm losing my voice. I'll keep this short. My town hall is this Thursday at 6 p.m. I hope you're able to join. We'll be at the MLK Library, and this Saturday is the 2nd annual strategic retreat for food justice Northwest Aurora. So if you live in Aurora, want to learn more about food access, food sovereignty, please join us at the Moorhead Recreation Center. Thank you.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, sir. Had a great town hall packed with a lot of information. We talked about the consent decree, the drought conditions, Oil and gas in Ward 2, nearly 12,000 barrels a day are produced in Ward 2 these days. A new innovation is electric drilling rigs, which are very quiet. We talked about solar arrays and research for alternative energy in Ward 2, which is abundant. And with that, if we just magically put electric cars in all neighborhoods and households, our electric grid is likely not to support that, so we need to have innovation and efficiency and investment in our grid system. And, of course, the need for a plethora of energy sources. Let's see, police graduation. I always try to attend a police graduation. We had 11 grads, 7 laterals, and 4 new recruits. Very sharp folks. Enjoyed that. Irene Chase is a centenarian. You and I both visited with this 100-year-old lady that has deep history in Aurora, and I think the mayor used to run with her when she was a younger gal. No, I'm just joking. So lastly, Councilmember Coombs and I went to Hinckley High School and talked to the youth there about how city government works and answered a lot of questions. That was very enjoyable.
Councilmember Medina.
Thank you, Mayor. My town hall will be next Wednesday, May 3rd from 6:30 to 8 here at the AMC, and we'll be talking with planning and the consent decree office. Thank you.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next Ward 4 meeting is going to be on Thursday, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. at Colorado Early Colleges. That's at 1400 South Abilene. You won't want to miss this one because we're going to be talking about water, drought and watering restrictions with Greg Baker from Aurora Water, followed by an update on the Community Advisory Council for the consent decree with Becky Hogan. So I hope to see you all there. Have a great night.
Councilmember Coombs.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next Ward 5 meeting will be May 16th, and we will be discussing the budget. So I highly encourage folks to come and talk about your budget priorities and interests. We also have the Charter Review Committee, the Council Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee continuing to meet, as well as the Citizens Ad Hoc Charter Review Commission to review proposed changes to the city charter. We are going to be working to schedule an additional public hearing because we have had a number of public safety related items sent to the council committee that will also be going to the citizens committee. So we want to make sure that there's an opportunity for a public hearing on all charter items that come forward. I did certainly enjoy, as Councilmember Sundberg mentioned, the opportunity we had to speak with the students at Hinckley. And I attended the Wednesday Aurora Scholars celebration, which was indeed wonderful, and I'm very proud of the students that we have here in our city. I also had the opportunity to attend the City of Aurora Libraries and Cultural Services Cozies Awards. And it was really awesome to just see the dedication of our library and cultural services staff and the work that they do every day for our city, as well as the Aurora Fire Rescue Awards Gala. And of course, there are some really impressive actions from our Aurora Fire Rescue members on behalf of our city. So that is all. Thank you.
Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you, Mayor. I also want to echo what Councilmember Lawson said about Aurora Scholars. We attended on Tuesday evening, and it was always a great event to see all the young kids get their award and be congratulated. So congratulations again to all of them. And then my next town hall is May 17th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Southeast Recreation Center. The main topics will be the budget as well as all issues related to water. Learn about why we're in drought conditions, why water rates have gone up and so forth. So hope to see you there on May 17th. Thank you.
Seeing no further business before the Aurora City Council, the meeting is adjourned.